Hi, I'm Bob and welcome to Bob's Movie Facts, and in this video we're going to talk about the third James Bond film, Goldfinger. Fact number 1, Goldfinger was chosen as the third movie because the novel was a standalone story.
After the success of From Russia with Love, a sequel was absolutely guaranteed. Initially, the sequel to From Russia with Love was going to be on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and Richard Maibaum even began working on the screenplay. However, the court case between Kevin McClory and Ian Fleming over Thunderball had just reached the High Court, which made it complicated to use characters like Blofeld and the organization of Spectre. To avoid any legal hassles, Saltzman and Broccoli chose Goldfinger, which had the benefit of being completely unrelated to Blofeld or Spectre. The producers further increased the budget from $2 million of From Russia with Love to $3 million. And Terrence Young was initially selected to direct the third movie, but there was a pay dispute. Terrence Young wanted a percentage of Goldfinger's profits, considering he had basically helped create the franchise, but the producers said no. So Terrence Young left and went on to direct a movie called The Amorous Adventures of Moll Flanders. The producers went with Guy Hamilton, and Guy Hamilton was originally Cubby Broccoli's first choice to direct Dr. No, but turned it down back then, but this time he accepted the job to direct the third film. Hamilton's first mission was to create a worthy villain. He felt that Bond needed to be less of a Superman and to be more vulnerable, and he felt that by creating a more powerful and threatening villain would be exactly what the franchise needed. And he was right.
Fact number 2, screenwriter Richard Maibaum fixed a flaw in Ian Fleming's novel.
Screenwriter Richard Maibaum, who co-wrote Dr. No and From Russia with Love, was hired to adapt Ian Fleming's novel Goldfinger into the third movie. For the most part, Richard Maibaum kept the general plot of Fleming's book. However, in the book, Auric Goldfinger's plan was to steal the gold in Fort Knox, and after the release of the book, fans and critics criticized the novel because it had a huge flaw in the story, that it would take Goldfinger over 2 weeks to steal the gold in Fort Knox, not just in a few-hour heist. Richard Maibaum had the idea that Goldfinger would not steal the gold, but rather irradiate the gold with a dirty bomb, thereby making his gold more valuable. And in one brilliant stroke, Richard Maibaum fixed a huge plot hole in Ian Fleming's novel. However, when he turned in the script, the producers worried that the script was too American and didn't have that distinct British feel they wanted in a Bond film. They hired screenwriter Paul Dane to help add that British element back into the Bond script. Paul Dane would later go on to write the screenplays for The Planet of the Apes and Murder on the Orient Express. Interestingly, Connery did not like Paul Dane's script, so Richard Maibaum was brought back to give it a third draft. So this script is a partnership between Richard Maibaum and Paul Dane. And one of the things Paul Dane suggested was a pre-credit action sequence, but unlike the pre-credit action sequence in the last film, which was related to the plot of the movie, this pre-credit action sequence would be its own sequence, completely separate from the rest of the film. Guy Hamilton and Richard Maibaum loved the idea of a short action sequence, which was essentially nonsense to the overall plot, but would set the tone for the rest of the movie in terms of humor, action, and fun. An appetizer for the rest of the movie. And this idea of an unrelated pre-credit action sequence will be a James Bond movie trope from here on out. In the novel Goldfinger, the book starts out with James Bond at a Miami airport and remembering his recent killing of a Latin American drug lord. So in an homage to the book, we actually see that mission in the pre-credit action sequence. So we start the film with James Bond invading the fortress, wearing a duck on his head, and it is so awesome. We're thrown immediately into the action, and the James Bond movie starts, he knocks out a guard, he sets charges to explode in the villain's lair, and afterwards he unzips his scuba gear, and he's wearing a flawless tuxedo. It's cool, it's fun, it's funny, and it tells us exactly what kind of movie we're in for. He goes to seduce a woman, but it's a double cross, and he's attacked by a heavy. But then he lets the girl get hit on the head, and then he throws the heavy into a bathtub and electrocutes him. And then dryly adds,
"Shocking."
And then he looks at the woman again who betrayed him and says,
"Positively shocking."
And here we get one of the first official James Bond one-liners, which will also become a huge James Bond trope. After his mission in Latin America, Bond heads to Miami, where he meets up with Felix Leiter. And Jack Lord, who played Felix Leiter in Dr. No, was asked to play Felix Leiter again, but he turned it down. And he was replaced by a different actor, a professional character actor named Sek Linder. And this would begin the tradition of having different actors play Felix Leiter in every movie. And in fact, only 2 actors, David Hedison and Jeffrey Wright, has played Felix Leiter in more than one movie. David Hedison played Felix in Live and Let Die and again in License to Kill. Jeffrey Wright is the only actor to play him in 2 back-to-back movies, Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, and again in No Time to Die.
Fact number 3, Shirley Eaton, covered in gold paint, became a pop cultural phenomenon.
Bond observes a gold dealer named Auric Goldfinger and learns that he cheats in gin rummy. He seduces Goldfinger's employee Jill Masterson and forces Goldfinger to lose the game. Bond and Masterson have a fun evening, but they are unaware that danger lurks in the form of Oddjob. And this scene where Harold Sakata strikes Connery with a karate chop to the neck, Sakata actually hit Connery for real. So when you see the pain look on Connery's face, that's not acting. He is really in pain. When Bond awakens, he discovers that Jill is killed and covered in gold paint. And this will become one of the most iconic images of 1964 in all of pop culture. Actress Shirley Eaton even graced the cover of Life magazine on November 19, 1964, painted in gold paint. Now, let me just ask you, is it medically safe for a person to be covered entirely in paint? Most people would say no, you would suffocate.
She died of skin suffocation. It's been known to happen to cabaret dancers. It's all right so long as you leave a small bare patch at the base of the spine to allow the skin to breathe.
And apparently, Ian Fleming just made this up, or really believed in this for some reason, because there have been no instances of cabaret dancers actually having medical problems because of painting themselves, nor surviving because they left a patch of skin on their spine. And there is some belief that this may have been common medical knowledge at the time, that skin suffocation could occur, but now we know that covering the body with paint is relatively safe and may cause mild elevation in blood pressure, mostly due to panic and placebo effect, but there is no medical sequelae of covering the skin completely in paint, because there is no oxygen transfer that occurs in the skin. However, I totally believed it at the time, and only recently, many years later, did I discover that skin suffocation is not true. Incidentally, this urban legend was explored in a March 7, 2003 episode of Mythbusters, where the myth was busted.
Fact number 4, Goldfinger introduced the classic dynamic between Bond and Q.
In this movie, James Bond visits Q Branch and sees Q, Major Boothroyd, at work. And remember in the last movie, From Russia with Love, Major Boothroyd was very respectful to James Bond. And that's the way Desmond Llewellyn started to play him in this movie scene. During rehearsals, when James Bond entered the lab, Q stood up very respectfully. And director Guy Hamilton suggested that Q not stand up and not show any respect. And this shocked Desmond Llewellyn, who protested, "But he's James Bond. He's the top agent for Her Majesty's service. I'm just a scientist. I would absolutely show respect like everyone else." And Guy Hamilton said, "No, you don't like Bond. He annoys you because he doesn't show your equipment the respect it deserves. He's always bringing your equipment back broken or destroyed." And so Desmond Llewellyn played the scene as if he were annoyed by Bond. And this created the definite dynamic between the two that would resonate throughout the James Bond franchise for the next 15 more films.
Fact number 5, the Aston Martin DB5 was the other star of this movie.
Another Bond staple is introduced here, and that is the super spy gadget car, the Aston Martin DB5. This is similar to the book, where Bond normally drives a Bentley, but for this mission is issued an Aston Martin DB Mark III. In fact, Bond even asks Q where his Bentley is, and Q tells him that M has ordered him a new car. In the book, Bond's Aston Martin only has one gadget, a smokescreen, but this movie version will have a lot more. The car was designed by Ken Adam, who was a huge sports car fan, so he let his own imagination let loose and his fantasy go wild in designing the super spy car that will inspire all super spy cars. He chose an Aston Martin DB5 over the novel-accurate Aston Martin DB Mark III because the DB5 was the latest model. And they were even able to convince Aston Martin to make a product placement deal and give them a prototype. Ken Adam and engineer John Steers had so much fun building the supercar. And everyone on set began to suggest gadgets that should go into this car. And this car has all sorts of cool stuff. Director Guy Hamilton came up with the idea for switching license plates because a few years earlier he had received a bunch of parking tickets and fantasized about having a car with switching license plates so he could avoid paying parking fines. He got to make his fantasy somewhat come true with this car. This car has bulletproof glass. This car has a mechanism that sprays oil in case the car is being followed. This car has machine guns, which was created by air pressure guns, which gave the effect of machine guns. This car is also equipped with special spikes that come out and destroy the wheels of the car next to it, and was inspired by the movie Ben-Hur. However, in the actual model Aston Martin, it did not have the spikes. Such spikes were impossible to build, and therefore they were never installed on the model, and the effect was done afterwards in the studio. Interestingly, these were not the only gadgets that were installed in this car. While they weren't used in the movie, the car also had front and back overriders for jamming other vehicles. It had a weapons tray under the driver's seat. It had a thermos, which had a built-in hand grenade. The headlights would pop up and shoot out triple spike nail clusters for firing at enemies. and it also had a radio telephone inside the driver's door paneling. But finally, the piece de resistance of the entire car is the ejector seat, which was such a wild idea that it shocked audiences when they saw it. Now, this would have been impossible to build with the technology of the time. It was accomplished by pushing pneumatic air through the seat, which shot a lightweight human-sized doll into the air. The Aston Martin DB5 was extremely popular, not only with adult fans, but also with children, and a toy model of the Aston Martin DB5 by Corgi Toys became the biggest selling toy of 1964. Incidentally, the actual Aston Martin used in this movie was sold at auction in 2010 for the price of a whopping $4.1 million. Of course, we can't discuss Goldfinger without mentioning the song. The producers gave John Barry complete control over the music, and he ran with it. The song was sung by Shirley Bassey,
and it was a complete hit. The song was so successful that the producers would use Shirley Bassey again in Diamonds Are Forever, and once more in Moonraker.
The song hit #1 and even displaced the Beatles as a #1 chart song.
Fact number 6. Gert Frobe was initially accused of being a Nazi, but later became a hero in Israel.
James Bond is sent to Switzerland to investigate Goldfinger, but first meets him at a golf course in England for a friendly golf match. And apparently Sean Connery had never golfed before, but while filming the scene, he developed a love of playing golf, and this would become a passion that he would have for the rest of his life. And here during this golf game, we learn that Goldfinger also cheats at golf. And when Bond humiliates him, Oddjob demonstrates what can happen to those who cross his boss. He decapitates a statue with a razor-rimmed bowler hat, and it's such an iconic supervillain moment, setting the pattern for future Bond henchmen that is, interestingly, rarely topped even to this day. And then we learn that Oddjob is so strong that he can crush golf balls with his bare hands. And apparently Sean Connery objected to the scene because it was so unbelievable. After all, no one could come close to crushing golf balls with their bare hands. However, Guy Hamilton convinced him that this scene was perfect and would create tension between Oddjob and Bond, making audiences wonder how James Bond would be able to eventually defeat this supervillain. Goldfinger and his henchman Oddjob are considered two of the greatest Bond villains of all time, and when we see them, we largely fear for Bond's life. For the main villain, Auric Goldfinger, the producers wanted Orson Welles, but Orson Welles' salary demands were way too high, so they went with German actor Gert Frobe, who was a prominent actor in Germany. Saltzman and Broccoli was impressed with Frobe's build and demeanor and his powerful presence on film. And when Eon asked Gert Frobe's agent if he could speak English, they insisted that he could, and so they hired him. But this was a lie. Frobe couldn't speak a word of English, and they tried coaching, but he just couldn't do it. So all of his dialogue was dubbed with an English actor named Michael Collins. So Gert Frobe had to phonetically mouth his dialogue in pantomime so that it could be dubbed over. But unfortunately, since the actor couldn't speak any English, he apparently had trouble mouthing the English, and so they had to continue to redo the scenes because he was not mouthing the words properly. An interesting thing happened when this film was released. Gert Frobe had joined the Nazi Party at age 16, but left the Nazi Party before World War II, but this information spread, and therefore this film was banned in Israel. However, a Jewish man named Mario Blumenow came forward and testified that during World War II, Gert Frobe had risked his life by hiding several Jewish people, including himself and his mother, hid them from the Nazis in his basement, and saved their lives. Frobe became an instant hero, and the ban in Israel was lifted, and Goldfinger became the #1 movie in Israel.
Fact number 7. Harold Sakata won a silver medal at the 1948 London Olympics.
Oddjob is played by Harold Sakata. Sakata was a third-generation Japanese-American born in Hawaii. When he was 16 years old, he dropped out of high school to work on a pineapple plantation farm. At 18 years old, Harold Sakata was skinny, weighing only 113 pounds, so he began his hobby of weightlifting. And in 1 year, he gained 20 pounds, and by age 23, after 5 years of weightlifting, he weighed 165 pounds and was bench pressing 250 pounds. During World War II, he served in the U.S. Army in the 1399th Engineer Construction Battalion. After World War II, he began to compete in weightlifting and set the Hawaiian record for the snatch and clean and jerk, and unofficially set the world record. In 1948, he qualified for the U.S. team at the 1948 London Olympics, where he won a silver medal. The next year, he became a professional wrestler, initially a hero known as Mr. Tank, capitalizing on his World War II service and his Olympic medal, but became much more popular as a heel known as Tosh Togo, and was so popular he wrestled all around the US and all around the world. He was a very successful professional wrestler for 10 years. Guy Hamilton saw Harold Sakata in a professional wrestling venue and considered him for the role of Oddjob, and he was fascinated by this weird way Harold Sakata moved and thought it might look great on film. And you can see these odd movements, the way he walks and fights in this movie. Saltzman and Broccoli loved his physical appearance, and they hired him immediately. And Guy Hamilton apparently really liked Harold Sakata and considered him an absolute gentleman and said that he was very professional, and the two continued to be friends for decades after this film. And of course, Oddjob is now considered one of the most memorable villains in all of cinema. After portraying Oddjob in this movie, Harold Sakata became very popular, especially with children, and he continued to star in TV commercials for many years.
Fact number 8, the laser torture scene was pretty scary to film.
James Bond follows Goldfinger and Oddjob to Goldfinger's estate where he investigates Goldfinger's sinister plan, but he is captured. And this leads to another iconic image where James Bond is tied on a torture table getting ready to be cut in half by a laser. And this was added for the film. It isn't in the book. In the book, Goldfinger threatens to cut James Bond with a buzzsaw. However, lasers were the new thing, and director Guy Hamilton wanted to put this new cutting-edge technology into this film, and even consulted 2 Harvard scientists to help design the accurate look and feel of the laser. And this leads to an iconic line where Bond says,
"Do you expect me to talk?"
and Goldfinger says,
"No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die."
It's a great line, very iconic. Absolutely iconic. Initially, the team actually acquired a 1960s laser to light up that fine red line. And the laser made a very fine red glow when all the lights in the room were turned off. However, when they lit the room with enough lights to film the scene, the red laser was not visible. So there was no way they could film it. It turns out they totally wasted money on the laser. In order to film the effect of the laser cutting the table, Sean Connery lied down on the table while a production team member was under the table, melting the table from below with a blowtorch. So there really was a dangerous metal-cutting blowtorch burning the table headed straight for Sean Connery's groin. A miscalculation, and Sean Connery could have been cut in half just as James Bond, because the production member below could not see above the table and could not see Sean Connery. Therefore, when you see Sean Connery squirm as a laser approaches James Bond's private area, that was not acting. Sean Connery was really nervous and really sweating. Fortunately, the scene went off without a hitch and no one got hurt.
Fact number 9, it wasn't easy getting the name Pussy Galore past the US censors.
My name is Pussy Galore.
For the role of Pussy Galore, the producers wanted Honor Blackman and went to her for the role, which she accepted. And unlike previous Bond girls who were unknown actresses at the time, Honor Blackman was already a huge star. Honor Blackman was already famous as Kathy Gale in The Avengers. Now, not the Marvel comic, but the James Bond-esque TV series with Patrick Macnee as the bowler-wearing John Steed, who always has a beautiful female partner. Honor Blackman accepted the role as Pussy Galore and left the show and was replaced by Diana Rigg, who would go on to play the iconic partner Emma Peel. Diana Rigg would also go on to play a Bond girl in the future movie On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Honor Blackman was born in Canning Town, West Ham, England, and attended North Ealing Primary School. And she wanted to be an actress, so on her 15th birthday, her parents bought her acting lessons, and she began training at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. Immediately after graduation, she got a job as an understudy in the West End play, The Guinea Pig, and soon got her first acting role in the play The Blind Goddess at the Apollo Theater. She soon got several roles in movies and television, but her breakout role was as Dr. Kathy Gale, a quick-witted anthropologist who was skilled in judo. Her character was unlike any female character on British television, and audiences fell in love with her. After the 3rd season, her contract was up, and she chose to leave the show to star in this movie. After Goldfinger, Honor Blackman continued to have an amazing film and television career, as well as a successful singing career. Honor Blackman continued to act into her 70s and 80s and even toured from 2005 to 2006 in a stage production of My Fair Lady at the age of 81. And at the age of 82, starred in a one-woman show, Word of Honor. Then, at the age of 84 years young, she released a new single album, The Star Who Fell from Grace. What an absolute inspiration. As a humorous reference to Honor Blackman being in a James Bond movie, in one episode of The Avengers, John Steed and Emma Peel actually get a postcard from Kathy Gale, who says she's having a great time at Fort Knox. The producers were concerned that the name wouldn't pass the censors and actually considered changing the name Pussy Galore to Kitty Galore. But instead, they decided to play a little clever politics. The producers apparently took the American censor and his wife out to dinner and wined and dined him, and they knew that the American censor was a loyal member of the Republican Party. So the producers talked about how much they were Republicans and how much they hated Lyndon Johnson. And they eventually made friends with him. And this apparently worked. The American censors actually backed off, and they allowed the use of the name Pussy Galore in the movie as long as they would not use the name in any advertisement, posters, or commercials. The character of Pussy Galore was actually based on Ian Fleming's girlfriend on Jamaica, Blanche Blackwell. In Ian Fleming's original novel, Goldfinger, Pussy Galore was a lesbian, which is why she gives Bond the cold shoulder when they first meet, which makes her transformation to Bond's ally a little more problematic.
Fact number 10, Goldfinger was filmed on Fort Knox, but no one was allowed inside the bullion depository.
For the scene of Fort Knox, no one is actually allowed inside the Fort Knox bullion depository. So the filmmakers had no idea what the inside of the depository looked like. They were able to get blueprints, but they turned out to be very unhelpful. This turned out to be a mixed blessing because Ken Adam just decided to let his imagination let loose and design what he thought the interior of Fort Knox might look like. Freed by any constraints of what the real Fort Knox looked like, Ken Adam just made everything up and envisioned Fort Knox as being a cathedral of gold. And boy, did he go for it. Apparently, even the comptroller of Fort Knox was very impressed with Ken Adams' imaginative vision of the vault and sent him a letter complimenting him. Interestingly, movie fans really believed that this was Fort Knox and even wrote letters asking how a British film crew was allowed inside Fort Knox. They had no idea it was all fake and made up by Ken Adam. As for the exterior of Fort Knox, where Pussy Galore's flying circus flies above, gassing all the soldiers, this was a real shot. Cubby Broccoli had some connections with the US military and got permission to film the scene. In the final showdown between James Bond and Oddjob, we have James Bond fighting an invincible foe, all to the counting clock of an atomic bomb. And we wonder how Bond is going to get out of this. But James Bond does find a way and electrocutes Oddjob. However, during this scene, Harold Sakata did not let go because he didn't hear the director say cut and continued to hang on despite receiving quite a shock and burned his hand and arm. And James Bond is desperate to turn off the bomb. A specialist comes in and deactivates the bomb at the last second. And in the original script, the bomb was shut off with 3 seconds to go. However, they thought it would be funny if the bomb was deactivated with 007 seconds left. And that's exactly what they did. Unfortunately, James Bond's creator Ian Fleming died in the summer of 1964, 1 month before the release of Goldfinger. He was only 56 years old and died of a heart attack, likely connected to his heavy consumption of alcohol.
Bonus fact, this movie was insanely successful.
Well, how did this movie do? This movie, made on a budget of $3 million, which was the combined budget of both Dr. No and From Russia with Love, went on to be a huge hit. This was both a box office and critical success. It actually made so much money in its original release that it actually entered the Guinness Book of World Records at the time for the fastest box office earnings. And it went on to make $46 million worldwide in its first release, and ultimately $125 million overall, which is worth $1.3 billion when adjusted for inflation. Furthermore, it is considered one of the best James Bond films and the historic moment where James Bond became a true phenomenon. And Goldfinger was the first James Bond movie to win an Academy Award for sound editing. It also began a trend of super spy movies and cheap James Bond clones. Prior to the release of Goldfinger in 1964, there were only 1 or 2 espionage movies per year, but this movie is going to explode that trend of spy movies. And 2 years after the release of Goldfinger, in 1966, Hollywood released 22 espionage films. Goldfinger is rated 71 in the AFI 100 Greatest Films, and in Entertainment Weekly's ranking of all the James Bond films, Goldfinger was rated number 1. Also, elements of this film have been homaged and spoofed in hundreds of movies, including The Simpsons, Austin Powers. Remember, the third movie of Austin Powers is called Goldmember, and it is homaged in the opening sequence of True Lies. And so we see history being created here. This is just an excellent, excellent movie. And so, where do you go from here? After Goldfinger, Eon is going to go all out and create a super high budget movie with a budget of $7 million in the 4th James Bond film, Thunderball.
Well, that ends my video. I hope you enjoyed these top 10 facts about Goldfinger. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.